We might be closer to an answer in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The country's been on edge for weeks over who won the presidential election. So let's start with Peninah. And Peninah, there's also a lot of fear that this answer might start violence.
Yes, indeed, Jonathan. The Democratic Republic of Congo's Electoral Commission has started deliberating and evaluating the presidential results. The meeting, which started on Tuesday evening, could last for 2 or 3 days. The results from a number of polling stations still needed to be counted. Police have been deployed in front of the Commission headquarters in the capital, Kinshasa, and along the city's main boulevard. The Central African nation held its historic polls on December 30th. It is bracing for possible violence amid accusations of vote fraud and suspicions that the government is negotiating a power-sharing deal with one opposition candidate. And joining me in studio is Richard Moncrieff. He is the Central Africa Director at the International Crisis Group. He's been following the developments there. So, Richard, how do you see this election going? Is it the ruling party or the opposition?
Oh, well, we can't tell at the moment. Let's say first that the actual election on the day went reasonably well. Most of the observers say that. The trick, as we've seen in other countries, is not so much the vote on the day, it's what happens afterwards, it's the count, it's how we announce the results and so forth. So we've gone from a reasonably well-run, or at least, you know, relatively so, voting day to some real tension. And the reason for this is that the Catholic Church last week, who had 40,000 observers on the ground, put out a statement which indicated that they knew who had won. Now, they're barred by law from naming a name, but it seemed fairly clear that they thought an opposition member had won. Now, that's a real bombshell, because the government in Kinshasa has tried to control this whole process to make sure that its candidate, Emmanuel Shadary, has won. So we've got a standoff, and we are in the middle of a standoff. Whatever the talk is about deals, at the moment, we've got a standoff with 3 candidates, Emmanuel Shadary, and then 2 opposition candidates, Martin Fayulu and Etienne Tshisekedi. All 3 are claiming at present that they've won the election. So it's a very, very tense situation.
All right. So you've brought about the talk of deals, because this has been reported that there is some discussions between one opposition candidate and the government about forming a coalition deal. And I'm just wondering, does this mean we're looking at a possibly disputed result?
I think we are firmly in the domain of a disputed result already. Now, what does a deal mean? The problem with a deal is what's its relationship to the electoral result? Because whoever is excluded from the deal is just going to go, wait a minute, this isn't about deals, this is about how people voted. So how do you make a deal? And certainly some deals are going to need to be made, but make sure that whatever deal you make respects the will of the people that's been expressed through the ballot box, and it's been expressed, you know, fairly peacefully and so forth in the ballot box. So the talk of deal is worrying, because it's going to start to make the Congolese and indeed international actors think, actually, when they say deal, they mean subvert the vote. So that's the problem with this.
Right. Well, we've seen some relatively peace, I should say, and calm so far. The results have been delayed. Certainly, they weren't announced when they were expected to be announced. But how long do you see this calm holding?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a short delay is in itself, per se, is no particular problem. And we do have to remember that this is a very, very delicate situation. This is the first time we've seen a transfer of power from one democratically elected president to another. So it's not surprising that we're going to see a lot of behind-the-scene negotiations. And that's normal, that's okay, that's important, because people have to be reassured. In particular, those who stand to lose in this need to be reassured that some of their interests are taken into account. We need an inclusive approach, but we also need a winner. The people voted, and they elected one person. And ultimately, a deal, a coalition, ultimately there's one winner here, and we need to deal with that reality as well.
And you've mentioned something very important. It is the first time we are seeing a peaceful democratic transfer of power in the DRC. So suddenly quite a test, I would say, to the country's democracy. How is it coming out?
Well, look, it's a massive test, and we're right in the middle of it. It's an enormous test, because in a country like DRC, the government, the president, the people around the president, they hold enormous power. They have the power of appointment, they have a lot of money, it's a huge prize. And the people who don't get that prize, they feel frozen out. So this is a huge test, and it's not surprising that we're seeing these tensions, that we're seeing these rumours. That isn't in itself surprising. But it is worrying if we're looking at people who are trying to make a deal that will subvert the will of the people. That won't work. People will be very angry about that, and that could spark violence, and it could really spark quite serious and long-lasting violence.
All right, Richard, we appreciate those insights. Thank you very much for your time. Richard Moncrieff.